Welcome to the Contact Center Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. We have a really interesting guest and very interesting conversation lined up today with Sanjeet Kaur Bali. Sanjeet, you are the SVP of Global Customer Support, but you come from a long line, even in your own family, of service orientation, military orientation, and you actually moved a lot as a child, which means you had to be adaptable, which is always a really good trait in today's business world, right? But adapting and accommodating, that's going to be a big part of what we're talking about, because the title here is Solving Dysfunction at All Stages of the Customer Journey, right? And we all know there's a lot of dysfunction inside of every organization. But we're going to talk a lot about customer support and the role and how do we help solve that, right? And what's our unique position in helping the organization internally and externally. But before we do that, I would love to turn it over to you and just learn a little bit more about your background before we get started.
So thank you for having me here, Steve. Really nice to be on this podcast. And generally, I don't do podcasts, but something about, your approach was really meaningful to me. And this topic is very dear to me. I'm Sanjeet Kaur Bali. I lead transformation change in, I would say, post-sales organizations. I've been a software professional, a support engineer, a leader for support, professional services, managed services, network operations center, transformation leader. I like to believe that I've covered all possible functions in an organization, except maybe product marketing and product management. My passion has always been to turn support services and success into strategic growth engines. Very obsessed with execution, very passionate about people, very passionate about doing the right thing for the business and people, and absolutely relentless about making customer experience a competitive advantage. I always say, we'll be the reason the customers would buy from us. That's my goal for my organization and my functions. Been very conscious about not just being a functional leader throughout my career and developing myself as a business leader who sees end-to-end view of the business and acts accordingly, and not just my individual function.
I love how you tied the importance of customer support into the overall customer experience and retention, not only in every B2B business. I think Forrester came out with a report that current existing customers account for 72% of all new annual revenue every year. So customer retention and expansion is a huge opportunity for us in any organization. And it's all tied to customer support, right? So, the word customer support, and you linked it to experience. There was another, and we talk a lot about this on the podcast, but I really want to get your point of view on this, is that customer experience is now the number one differentiator for businesses today. And that's not just us and our opinion, which is really important, right? But that's like a McKinsey study that, looked at very highly profitable companies, both B2C, B2B companies, and came out with that conclusion. So what we're going to talk about here today is super important. And the last thing that when you made that transition, what I loved is in customer support, we're still looked upon in a lot of ways as a support department, right? And yet we're so tied to growth and revenue, and we're the front line with the customers. The customer is the highest voice of authority in any business. The fact that we're looked upon as a support function or a cost center, right? I'd love to get your thoughts on that and kind of how we dispel that today as well.
Absolutely.
But here's the number one thing. You are very passionate about customer support, customer experience, helping to solve the dysfunction within organizations. I just love to hear your point of view on that dysfunction and then how we can play a role in that.
I think every organization that I've worked for, and now also talking to my peers and different leaders in different organizations, I think people don't understand the importance of getting things done right, in the sense that dysfunction is almost like a very slow erosion. Dysfunction is impaired or abnormal functioning, right? Organizational dysfunction is almost a systemic breakdown of functioning of an organization. Now, dysfunction is not just about some isolated problems. It's basically about a system that slowly stops functioning. And a decay sets in, and it's almost like a whisper. It's so quiet that it does not surface until it has actually compromised an organization's ability to scale, serve, or innovate. Well, if you look at dysfunction, it shows up in basically the erosion of clarity, effectiveness, productivity, performance, growth, and execution. And people don't see it very well because we always have different reasons of why things are not working. So, keeping the market and macro conditions aside, there is lots at risk within the execution of our functions who are set up to do a certain job. And then you suddenly realize that they're not optimally functioning, but we probably just get into this chronic reactivity and solving problems that shouldn't have been in the first place. So now what happens is when dysfunction sets in, it's quiet, it's generally quiet, and you figure it out very later in the stages. Silos form. Over time, mediocrity becomes normalized. Underperformance becomes the norm. Leaders chase symptoms and make short-sighted decisions over fixing the root causes. Teams tiptoe around hard truths for the sake of cordiality, right? So it's dangerous. It's dangerous because it slowly eats away as decay does. There is, if you don't challenge it, then it becomes culture of the organization. Culture entropy is the root cause of the organization dysfunction. And very soon you'll find organizational dysfunction is running on an autopilot. I don't even have to dwell on it, honestly, Steve, because if you think about Patrick Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team, it says it all. And if you look at any organization which is struggling today, the core things are those 5 things that Patrick talks about: absence of trust, fear of conflict, lack of commitment, lack of accountability, inattention to details. And ultimately, you end up with this whole web of band-aids, short-sighted decisions, and really it takes away the ability of an organization which could be all awesome. And you don't then end up at the end of a quarter or end of the year doing financial engineering and letting go of people. If leaders could just have the right visibility into what's ailing the business and solving for those bigger problems, the systemic problems. So I'm pretty passionate about this subject because I feel like as leaders, we have the power to do things right and take out this dysfunction. If only we could have that, constructive confrontation and assessment of these things that are ailing the business, the dysfunction.
What's really interesting is I've interviewed over 50 different C-suite executives, from CEOs, CMOs, CROs, you name it, and asked them what they felt was their largest challenge to creating long-term sustainable growth. 72% of the answers have been internal challenges. And as I'm listening to you, I think those internal challenges are all symptoms of exactly what you're talking about. They may cloak it in misalignment, right, as an internal challenge, lack of core decision making, right, siloed data, and all kinds of things. But when it really comes down to it is we haven't fixed the dysfunction that would put all of that on course, right?
Yep.
And so I'm going to ask you this question in terms of, I think we understand clearly how important this is, but I would like to ask you on your idea of scale of 1 to 10, fixing this dysfunction inside of any organization. Where would you put that on the scale of 1 to 10 in importance? 1, it's not important at all. We could care less. Let's move on to something else, right? 10, it's vital. It's critical.
It is the most critical part of an organization functioning, has to be the top priority. And leaders who tiptoe around these agendas will never solve for it. And I think what I've seen in my own experience is that people have the right intentions. Everybody wants to do the right thing, but are they accountable enough? Are they passionate enough to drive these agendas? And I think sometimes we assume that our leadership knows it all. We know that they have the right visibility to the right problems. And what I have seen is that they know the problems, but not the gravity at which the problems are. And it's us not doing the right job of bringing that exact visibility. What I've seen in my experience is that when I worked with C-level, when I brought the right level of visibility to these issues and these agendas as a support leader to them, the way they enabled things to happen and the kind of success that we created was phenomenal. So it's just the right level of visibility. And for that, you have to be a truth teller. For that, you have to get into constructive confrontation. But then management has to enable such problem solvers. You need to empower problem solvers. You need to empower critics. It's like super important, right? If you dismiss what you see and you don't want to see it because you don't want to tackle it, or you want to live in that illusion of comfort of everything is all right, it's just the macroeconomic conditions, then you can't solve for it. So self-awareness, I don't know if you read the book from Andy Grove on Only the Paranoid Survive. And
No, but I love the title.
yeah, it is. It is about you have to do brutal self-assessment to survive as an organization, right? So it requires you to always seek the truth, creating that culture of truth, seeking truth, knowing your hard truths, having those conversations. So it's really important. And I feel that support can play a great role. Support does disservice when support does not understand that they sit at that junction where they have visibility of almost a reflection of customer experience at customer end. Support knows it all because they sit at the front line and they have a great view of all that's broken, right? So I feel that's the role that a support leader must play. And there's power in that.
It's interesting as you talk about the C-suite or trained at the C-suite level, right? Like, never have I been involved in a board meeting where a board member said, hey, talk to me about those internal alignment plans, right? Talk to me about the internal challenges that you have and how you're solving them. It's always focused externally. It's focused short term. How are we doing on this quarter's quota? How does next quarter's quota look like, right? But then it's about sales targets and it's about conversion rates and strategies. And it's about the sales team and the makeup and how we're changing our outward marketing campaigns and messaging. And so, but these are the kinds of things that we should be asking. But if the C-suite isn't being asked that, the C-suite isn't being held accountable to that, then it's probably no wonder that it doesn't have the attention that it should, right?
Absolutely.
So here's the next question is, as a support customer experience, how do we influence this? How do we play that very important role?
Yeah. So there are two aspects to it. Just like, I talk about different functions when they're not optimized and they're not running optimally. And then they are constantly caught up in, like I say, reactivity to solve a problem that shouldn't have been in the first place, of keeping those standards, defying the standard that they've kept for those functions, right? Same holds for support. Support organization, there's an implicit assumption that this is a mature function, right? They've got it. Or you'll always be stating that, hey, the volume of tickets, the complexity of our context, all of this is drowning support. And support is in its own reactive motions. And most of the support organizations that I know have been rendered as break-fix organizations, and they're not building on the capabilities that they need to do, and pause and reflect and look at their operating model again to say, what's not there? What are the capabilities that we need to build? What is not working for us? So that's one part of it. The other part of it is the part that you touched before, support being seen as this operational necessity, this support function, right?
Right.
So strategic integration of support in the C-suite is absolutely the necessary thing. And the leadership who understands the role of support makes sure that support is this robust function in the organization. And I can't emphasize enough the need for support to be transformed to not just be this firefighting, tactical, transactional entity, but an entity that's focused on adoption, customer experience, effective and efficient resolution, the right escalation. So there are so many capabilities around support that we haven't leveraged. But think about which organization is better placed to drive retention and expansion today. Because at the end of it, we can go and talk all the good stuff, but customers want their problems resolved first. And if you are suffering at that, if you're not giving them the right experience, if you're not solving their problems effectively and efficiently, if they constantly have to log tickets with you versus just be served well or being able to manage with a great product or a great solution working for them, then you can do all the customer success motions and it won't work because you haven't even created the basic stability and resiliency in regular support framework for them. So I believe support has to focus on where are the friction points, where is the effort, where is the gap in functionality and features, what are the bottlenecks, what is coming in the way of customer successful adoption, and how do I retain this customer? Is there a risk involved? Is there something that is a need? Oh, there are expansion opportunities. So support can play that role, but for that, first support has to transform itself. And for that, you cannot do with traditional leadership anymore. You need transformational leaders in support because the impact of support in an organization is way, way, way bigger than any other organization in the company. And I believe that, having led professional services, support, success, and all other teams myself, this is a very important role.
It only makes sense, right? I mean, there's not a organization in existence today that doesn't say we're not customer focused, we're not customer obsessed, right? We're all are. But it's to the degree that we actually enact that we make that as a part of our core plan. And if customer support has the most conversations with customers than anyone else, it puts us in the driver's seat for reflecting that voice of the customer, right? The highest voice of authority in the business. It puts us at the focal point, the hub, the spokes out to every single department, right?
Yeah.
Yet you and I talked about this. We have a hard time getting a seat at the table, even, right? Like, tell me a little bit about how you go about earning that seat at the table and making sure that that voice of the customer is coming through and is parsed out in the right ways to all the right people so that they can do their job, whether it's product development or operations or sales or whatever it is, right? All that feedback is coming, right? It's all there.
The first is the shift from transactional and tactical to relational, as well as the switch from symptoms to root causes. I think a support leader has to start with understanding the customer context as well as their employee context, because I do believe that you cannot create the right customer experience if you don't design the right employee experience. So a great assessment of what's ailing the business in terms of what are the recurring issues? What are the systemic themes, right? What are the patterns that we are seeing at the customer end? That needs to be the voice of the customer that needs to be brought back to the product and development organizations as well as to the management. So having that holistic view, because that holistic view is so important for strategic decision making of whatever plans that you're putting for your first year, 1 year, or 5-year plan. If you don't have that view, how do you prioritize? How do you create or kind of, do the right product portfolio rationalization if you don't have that input? How do you go about designing your end of life support policies or end of maintenance, or what needs to happen for your release planning and what's happening with your releases if you don't have that view? So support leaders cannot just sit there as ticket machinery, ticket management machinery. That's what most of the support organizations end up being. I was interviewed by many leaders a couple of times for different roles, and I did not choose to go to those organizations because in those interviews, all I was asked was, tell me about your metrics, right? Support leaders have been relegated to these, go follow your backlog reduction and get efficient at doing more with less, solve your tickets faster. There's no holistic view of how this function can do much more than what you're expecting it to do. And putting them in the break fix cadence actually ruins the customer experience. So The goal is that you have a view of systemic issues, patterns, and bringing that voice of customer back to the conversation, building really strong product and dev interlock, because development team is themselves busy doing, churning out new releases, fixing bugs and defects. They need help to have a view of what's happening in my product, right?
Right.
So support has to play that role. That whole data-driven decision-making can only be done through support by bringing that view back to the organization. Also, we need to understand, especially in the context like the ones that the businesses that I have led, is that complexity is growing. So it's highly complex, high volume tickets. That is a B2B. And then you have high volume, low complexity, B2C. The pain on the individuals in the support function is huge because we have been caught up in this reactive firefighting for so long. That's become the rhythm of the organization. We're not done enough for creating the right level of capabilities, whether it's dedicated teams from knowledge, whether it's the subject matter expertise, whether it's the tools, whether it's the automation. So what you're doing is basically reacting after one tickets versus looking at the system as a whole, taking out the recurring patterns, solving for them, building great talent. The another piece, I think, Steve, is the talent management. We are mistaking headcount for talent, right? There is no focus motion in any organization on talent. And it's a very, very important piece, but it's a piece which is very underserved in the sense that there's not enough focus on building subject matter expertise. There is a huge population of highly experienced, high expertise people leaving the system as they are aging population. They've been around for 3 decades, 4 decades. Now they're exiting the system. Have we created enough succession planning? I don't think so. So I think in all, we have done a disservice by not optimizing for back to the basics, the ticket management. If you do process mining of just that piece, you'll see there's so many bottlenecks in there. That tells you again about the capabilities that have not been built or been optimized over time to serve the customers right, and creating conditions of success for your people to be able to be effective at their work. And also remember, support is a catch-all function. So everything, whether it's implementation teams not doing their jobs well, whether it's discovery not happening well, whether sales selling the wrong product, all of that lands in support. Now, if support doesn't do a good job of saying, hey, what's coming to me? And let me go back and inform the rest of the organization of what needs to be fixed, you can't fix for it. So that's the problem that I feel support has a role to play, and a very effective and the most important role to play. And a support leader, by bringing that voice of the customer, the voice of the employee to the strategic, to the C-level table, can change the course of the organization. And not just sitting outside and acting like a functional leader, but leading these charters as a business leader for rest of the organization with cross-functional collaboration, breaking functional silos, and solving these problems as not support problems, solving these problems as business problems. I think that's the drift.
If those connection points aren't naturally evolving out of an organization, right, where the meetings between customer support and product and operations and sales and marketing and feedback on that new launch you just put out and the messaging, and if those connectivity points aren't happening naturally within an organization, how do you go about establishing them, right, when they're not naturally there?
They will be. And I'll tell you, I'm very intentional about something of this nature. And the intentional piece is to not make these support charter in the sense that once you do the assessment of what's systemic and what's recurring patterns, you create cross-functional teams. There is cross-functional ownership of these initiatives. When you set them up as like these 5 initiatives, right? We're going to do a great job at discovery. We're going to do a great job of onboarding. We're going to do a great job at the next 2 releases that are coming, which are major releases. Or we're going to do a great job at how we do handovers, basic stuff, right? But when you put cross-functional teams in there, cross-functional leaders are available. They have the same mission. Everybody is singing from the same music notes, right? Then when the development leader and the support leader shows up in the same room, speaking the same language, trust me, even the ones who are like passively resisting the process, soon they have to come to terms with what's the direction? Where is the destination? Where is this bus going? And then the messaging is very clear. Either get on the bus or get off the bus. But we're going to go solve for this, right? So I think that cross-functional collaboration is at the core of driving those initiatives. If we drive initiatives and keep it just like within support or within success, they don't succeed because people see it as somebody else's initiative. They don't see it as their initiative. I'll talk about something very important because most of the times, if you look at support, like I said, everybody's around backlog reduction or improving resolution times and doing things faster or cutting the headcount and doing more with less. And let's put one AI ML solution and run those use cases. But I think there's one thing that I'm very passionate about. It is about how do you reduce the volume of tickets? Now, that can't be solved just by support. It has to be solved by professional services. It has to be solved by engineering. It has to be solved by how I look at my operating model and build a robust model around self-service, reactive, and proactive. There are three key layers of support. You have to design for each one of that. So reactive cannot get a bad rap. We have to be reactive in life. Things will happen, always happen. How do we establish ourselves to be able to be doing the right thing at the right time, the right way, because we are prepared? When crisis happens, it hits us. We know we are prepared. We're going to tackle it somehow because we're prepared for it. Similarly, self-serve motions. How do you bring about development, product, all other things to serve, to build that knowledge that ultimately fuels your self-serve? Similarly, proactive. How do you utilize the right level of capabilities to build insights through AI ML solutions to then take to the product and the professional services organization with the right insights to what to solve for? Because we're all problem solvers at the end of it. It's just like, do we have the right ways of surfacing these things? So yes, I feel like that's the play. That's the playbook. Cross-functional initiatives.
There was this great Harvard business study that came out, and it showed that we remember things 23 times better if it's told to us in the form of a story. Is there a story that comes to mind, all your work and all your experience? You don't have to name names or anything like that, but where establishing those relationships and providing that kind of feedback and support, like, turned on light bulbs with others that are in those different departments. Is there a particular story that comes to mind that you wouldn't mind sharing with us?
Honestly, it happens every other day. It's funny how, the information, how we consume, how it surfaces, and the interpretation of it, right? So it happens every day. Yes, one story comes to my mind. And this was a very, very unique context where right people were involved, the best of people were involved in a particular account, a big account, like a big, big, big enterprise account. And everybody had a sense that we were on the right track, customer, we were very engaged. And I was not in those meetings. But reading what I was reading, my intuition was telling me something's going to go wrong in this account. So naturally, I was highlighting it as a very critical account, while rest of the organization and my friends were saying that this is going to be okay because we are very involved. So I kind of escalated it to my CEO, saying, hey, I'm reading something really bad here. I have a feeling we're going to lose this account. We're going to lose this business. And my CEO told me that he said, okay, he met me for 15 minutes and I took him through all that. And he said, you know what, Sanjeet, something is odd. I would like to believe you, but I think you're kind of exaggerating this context. He said that to me, and he was a big fan of mine. But that was a sense because he had just met the sales guy, and sales guy had told him that everything was okay and everything was all right. So I told him I was not trying to be arrogant or anything, but I said, okay, from what I know as a customer support leader, and if I have had any experience in customers, mark my words, in 1 week from now, you will hear that we would have lost this business. And he said, how do you know? You're not in those meetings. There are other people. Because before that, I also had a 2-hour call somewhere where this person told me that I had no clue. Another person told me, I had no clue. This was a product management team. And they said they had no clue because they were involved, they knew whatever. In 2 days, the letter came. We had lost 60 million worth business.
Oh,
It's just an instinct, but I feel like support, because we interact with customers so much, we know at deep level how they experience our solutions. We know at deep level. So sometimes in that context, I don't think it was anything wrong. It was just that customer was being very polite with us. But my instinct, looking at the context and what they were comparing us to and what the data was looking like and all the things that I was hearing, I had built a view. So yeah, you find yourself in those situations where you face deflection, you face defensiveness, you face denial in a lot of those situations. So my view, being a transformation leader and talking, because we're talking dysfunction, is that behaviors which are visible, Steve, you can tackle those. The dangerous behaviors are the ones which are passive resistance, people nodding in the meeting, saying all the yes things, and then going out and undermining the change. So behaviors at the end of it, and understanding of different people's different contexts can sometimes harm the business. So therefore, there is a need for us to challenge each other a lot. You and I can be friends with constructive confrontation because we should always bring data and not emotions to the conversation. So as support, if we could leave the anecdotal part and bring data to conversations and drive those conversations based on data, I think we can have more really good conversations. And we need to get away from the culture of just tiptoeing around people. I would say support can play a very powerful role in assessing. And, if you're wrong, good for the business. I'm wrong. My instinct was wrong. I'll save the account. But if my instinct was right and I'm being super vigilant and I'm being brutal in our assessment, I think it serves the business right. We should encourage that kind of engagement in an organization.
that brings a whole new level to when you said look for patterns, right? We can't look at isolated tickets and meetings and questions, and we have to look at it in total. And I love everything that you said here. What I want to ask you is one last question, which is if there was one thing that you wanted executives all throughout customer support, customer experience industry to take away, the one thing that's most important to take away from this podcast, what would that be?
One, I would say, realize the importance of support function. Don't see it as some operational necessity. It is strategic. So I think pause and relook at the operating model of your support organization. Are we investing in the right capabilities? Are we leveraging this function the way it's supposed to be leveraged? This function is the talent factory for the rest of the organization. I have built great professional services people, sales people, onboarding people, customer success people, great developers coming from support organization. Leverage this talent pool well. Third thing, and the most important, create a culture of critical conversations. Face your hard truth. Empower your critics. Empower problem solvers and solve this problem. Because it's really difficult to get new business. It's easier to retain your existing one. And there's a huge leakage happening out there because we're not doing things right, because we're not establishing the right capabilities, right? So I feel that there's a need for us to relook at support, its operating model, its strategic integration, role of the support leader at the C level of what that report, because we have CCOs, right? I think there's a need for support leaders to be at the C level as well to drive the right actions. And then think about it. At the end of it, support is back to basics. Your ticket optimization has to be your number one core thing, but there's so many other layers where support can play a great role in attention and expansion. And I feel like it's for us to leverage those capabilities and use that. So yes, and I think facing hard truths would be the start because we need to reassess and have a really good assessment of what's ailing our business.
I think the last thing that you said there was my takeaway is we have to look at the hard truths, right? Those are easy to turn the other way and they've been there. It's not what I'm being asked to look at. It's not affecting my day to day. I can push it down the road and nobody's going to ask. Right. So I just want to say thank you because I know people are going to have questions. Is it okay if we give out a link to your LinkedIn profile?
Absolutely.
Fantastic. The other thing is that the mission of this podcast is to bring different perspectives and different ideas and shine a light in areas in our business that we haven't shined before, right? And if we all do that from our experiences and our background, it's like the saying, the rising tide that lifts all boats. And I think you did a tremendous job in rising the tide today. I just wanted to say thank you for everything.
I will just say, Andy Groves, only the paranoid survive, not the crazy anxious kinds. The paranoid, you have to have some level of paranoia and passion into doing the right thing for your business. And I think I would love each and encourage each one of you to be passionate about what you do. I love my job. I want each one to know that, want to do the right thing for their business for sure. And that is why starting with the hard truths. Absolutely.